stripped of her life's blueprints. The master artisan watched her ruthless cousin steal her masterpiece on national television, banishing her to a decaying clockmaker's basement. However, at the Global Heritage Summit, the humble old man polishing brass beside her revealed his true identity as the industry's billionaire titan, ready to obliterate the thief's fake empire. For those who crave intense stories of professional betrayal, hidden power, undeniable talent, and devastatingly cold karma, grab a seat and let this masterpiece unfold. Exactly 14 minutes after the press conference ended, the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite clicked shut. The applause from the lobby was still echoing through the thick glass walls. Elena stood in the center of the vast, cold room, her hands trembling slightly. Her fingertips still carried the faint, dark stains of machine oil and brass polish. On the massive desk in front of her sat the pristine presentation folder holding the Heart of Time. It was her design.
How could you do
Every
this,
single
Dad?
gear, every delicate spring, and every calculated millimeter of that watch had been born in her mind. Yet, just moments ago, she had watched her cousin Diana hold up that exact folder under the flashing cameras, claiming it as her own brilliant creation.
Oh, honey,
Diana
you
walked into the
actually thought that
room
would
now,
work.
her high heels sinking
You really
into the
don't
plush
belong
carpet.
here, do you?
She poured herself a glass of expensive champagne, a bright, victorious smile plastered across her face. Mr. Vance, Elena's adoptive father and the current head of the company, followed close behind.
almost
He did
amusing
not
how
look at
predictable
Elena.
your
He
failures
simply
are,
walked
Elena.
to his leather chair and sat
Almost.
down, his face entirely unreadable. "How could you do it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence in the room felt heavier than the ticking of the antique clocks lining the
Just
walls.
give me a chance to
Diana took a
explain.
slow sip
Please
of her
don't
drink
shut me out.
and let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "Oh, stop looking like a wounded animal, Elena. We did what had to be done." Elena stepped forward, her eyes locked on the folder. "That took me 3 years.
You're fired. Get
I
out of
stayed
my
in the
office.
basement workshop every single night, going blind over those micro gears, while you were out attending fashion shows. And that is exactly why my name is on the cover," Diana shot back smoothly. "You are a ghost. You hide in the dust. The board does not want a quiet, awkward tinkerer as the face of this luxury brand. They want a star. They want me."
That
Elena
document
turned to
proves
Mr.
everything, Mr. Vance.
Vance,
You can't just
desperately
take it.
hoping to find some trace of the man who had taken her in when she was an orphaned child. "Dad, tell her. You saw me draw the first drafts. You know the truth." Mr. Vance finally raised his head. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of warmth. "Diana is right," he said flatly. The words hit Elena with a brutal physical force. She stared at him, unable to process the betrayal. "We are running a high-end business, Elena, not a charity for introverted artists. Diana has the charisma to sell this design to the global
Everything you
market.
see out there,
Your
soon it
name
will
on that
all be
patent would
mine,
bring
Mr. Vance.
zero media value." Elena shook her head slowly. "This is not about media value. This is about theft. You let her steal my life's work on national television." Mr. Vance frowned, his expression hardening. "Watch your tone in this office. Nobody stole anything. You work for Vance Horology. Therefore, anything you create belongs to the company. And the company has chosen Diana to represent it." Elena felt her chest tighten. The injustice was so blatant, so aggressively
With ratio here, it
unapologetic,
seems impossible
that
at
it
this
left her
tolerance.
momentarily
Impossible or
breathless.
simply
Diana
difficult,
walked over
Mr.
to the
Diana.
desk and picked up
We
the
require
folder,
precision.
tracing the gold-embossed letters of the title. "You should be thanking us," Diana said with a cruel smirk. "We are elevating your little hobby into a global sensation.
No,
Without
Elena.
my face and my marketing, your
This doesn't
drawings would
concern
just
you.
rot in that miserable basement." Elena clenched her fists.
wrong,
"You don't even
Diana.
know how
I
the
told you
escapement
we
wheel
can't do
functions,
this. Look at
Diana.
the schematic.
If
It's
anyone
completely
asks you a technical
unstable.
question,
Your opinion
you
is
will
irrelevant,
humiliate
Elena.
yourself."
The
Diana
primary
laughed
chronometer
again,
is
a
unstable,
sharp
Diana. We
grating
can't ship it
sound.
like this. Your hands are filthy.
"I don't need to know how it
suggest you clean up
operates.
before
I just
approaching
need
me
to
with factory
smile and
concerns.
look pretty, holding it. The technicians will handle the rest." Before Elena could argue further, Diana carelessly flipped through the technical drawings. Her manicured fingernail tapped on a complex schematic of the central gear. "This part looks messy," Diana casually remarked to Mr. Vance. "We should simplify these jagged teeth before production. It doesn't look elegant." Elena felt a sharp spike of pure disbelief. You cannot touch those edges, Elena warned instinctively, taking a step forward. That is the gravity compensation unit. If you smooth those teeth, the entire movement will lose friction, and the watch will shatter its own mainspring within 24 hours. Diana glared at her, annoyed by the sudden correction. It is a design choice, Elena. People pay for aesthetics, not invisible friction. Mr. Vance nodded in agreement with Diana. We will have the engineering team look at it. Diana's vision takes priority now. It was in that exact moment Elena realized the true tragedy of the situation. They were not just stealing her work, they were going to butcher it. They held a masterpiece in their hands and treated it like a cheap disposable toy. The dedication she had poured into calculating the exact tension of the coiled springs meant absolutely nothing to them. Mr. Vance leaned forward and opened a side drawer.
We appreciate your service.
He pulled out a thick stack of papers and pushed it across the polished desk toward Elena. Since we are discussing your role here, we need to finalize the transition. Elena looked down at the documents. The bold letters at the top read, Non-Disclosure Agreement and Voluntary Resignation. Her heart dropped. Resignation, she whispered. You are firing me? We are streamlining the creative department, Mr. Vance replied without missing a beat.
Out of my
Having
office,
you
Elena.
around will
We're
only
done
create
here.
unnecessary tension. Diana needs a clear runway for this launch. We cannot have a disgruntled former assistant
be clear,
whispering
Diana.
lies to the press.
I built
Elena
this
felt a
company
sudden
from
sharp
nothing,
sting
and I
behind
will
her
not
eyes.
tolerate failure on your watch.
But she refused to let the tears fall. You are throwing me out. After everything I built for you, I took you in when you had nothing, Mr. Vance said, his voice turning harsh. I fed you, clothed you,
Did you
and
really
let you
think I
play
wouldn't
with the
find out
tools in
about
my
the
grandfather's
discrepancies in the
workshop.
timing
You owe
mechanisms,
this
Mr.
family
Vance?
everything. Signing these papers is your way of paying off that debt. Elena stared at the pen resting on top of the contract. The sheer arrogance of the demand was suffocating. And if I refuse, she asked quietly, if I walk out of here and tell the truth? Mr. Vance's face darkened completely. The mask of the benevolent adoptive father vanished, leaving only a ruthless businessman. If you refuse, I will personally ensure you never touch a watch face in this city again. I will bury you in legal fees. I will tell the industry you are a disturbed, jealous girl who tried to sabotage her own sister. Who do you think they will believe? The powerful CEO or the dirty-handed orphan? Elena stepped back, feeling a cold numbness spread through her veins. The family she thought she had was nothing but an illusion. They had kept her around purely as a convenient tool, a silent laborer to fuel Diana's unearned success. Diana leaned against the desk, crossing her arms. Just sign it, Elena. Go find a nice, quiet
Mr.
job
Vance,
repairing cheap
please.
wristwatches at some
Can't
mall
just ignore
kiosk.
this. People
Leave
are
the
gonna
real
lose
legacy to
everything
the
if you don't help
professionals.
us.
The legacy, Elena repeated. A
I've
sudden
already
thought
made my
struck her,
decision.
making her blood run cold.
See to it
What
that it's
about the
done
old
by
ancestral
Friday.
workshop in the suburbs? You promised it to me when I turned 25. You said it would be mine to restore antique clocks. Mr. Vance did not even blink. Plans have changed. Diana needs a private studio for her promotional shoots. The old workshop is being cleared out tomorrow. We are tearing down those rusty benches to put in a photography set. That was the final blow. The ancestral workshop was the only place Elena felt safe. It was where she had spent her childhood, learning the delicate art of watchmaking, far away from the toxic ambition of the main house. The thought of Diana tearing down those historic wooden benches to take vanity photos made Elena physically sick. You cannot do that, Elena said, her voice finally breaking. That place holds the soul of this family's craft. The craft is dead, Mr. Vance snapped. Image is what prints money.
The
Now
terms
sign
are
the paper, or I will have security
Sign on
throw
the
you
line
out right
indicated,
now without
and
a
the
single
agreement
dime of
is
severance.
finalized.
Elena looked at the two people standing before her. There was no reasoning with them. Greed had completely hollowed out whatever humanity they once possessed. She reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen. Her hand was steady now. The fear and the hurt vanished, leaving behind nothing but a profound, freezing clarity. She leaned over the desk and signed her name on the dotted line. The ink bled into the thick paper. Diana let out a triumphant sigh. Good girl. Now pack your things and leave through the service elevator. The press is still downstairs and we cannot have you ruining the aesthetic. Elena dropped the pen. She did not look at the contract again. She looked straight into Mr. Vance's eyes.
They
Keep the blueprint,
underestimated
she
us,
said, her
Diana.
voice eerily
The
calm.
patents are
You can
secure,
steal the
and
paper, but you
Vancerology
can
is
never
officially
replicate the
ours.
hands that built it. When it breaks, and it will, Neither of you will know how to fix it. Mr. Vance scoffed, turning his back to her. Diana rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, it's just a clock. Goodbye, Elena. Elena turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors. She did not look back. She pushed the doors open and stepped out into the long, brightly lit corridor. The walk to the basement felt endlessly long. The walls of the corporate building, once a symbol of her future, now felt like the bars of a prison. She was finally escaping. When she reached the underground workshop, the air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of cedarwood and brass polish. It was quiet down here. Her small desk sat in the corner, covered in tiny, meticulously organized compartments of screws, gears, and delicate springs. She pulled a worn leather satchel from under the desk and began to pack. She did not take any of the expensive company equipment. She only took what truly belonged to her. She packed her custom-made brass tweezers, the magnifying loupe she had used since she was a teenager, and a small, soft polishing cloth. Every item she placed in the bag held a memory of quiet dedication. She left behind the modern laser cutters and the expensive digital scopes. True craftsmanship did not rely on flashy machines. It relied on patience and an unbreakable will. She zipped the satchel shut and slung it over her shoulder. As she walked out of the service exit into the cold evening air, the harsh neon lights of the city buzzed above her. The wind bit through her thin coat, but Elena did not shiver. She had lost her blueprint. She had lost her reputation. She had lost the only family she had ever known. But as she stood on the dark pavement, listening to the faint, steady ticking of the old pocket watch in her coat, she realized something else. She was finally free from their shadow. The rain hitting the cracked cobblestones washed away the lingering scent of the city center. Elena walked away from the towering glass skyscrapers, pulling her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. The air here grew thicker, smelling of wet asphalt and roasting street food instead of sterile air conditioning and expensive perfume. She had taken the train all the way to the industrial outskirts, far from the polished marble floors of Vance Horology. A small brass bell chimed brightly as she pushed open the heavy wooden door of a shop wedged between two abandoned warehouses. The faded sign above the entrance simply read Arthur's Repairs. The air inside was completely different. It was dense and warm, heavy with the aroma of aged cedar wood, sweet lubricating oil,
I'm sorry, but
and the
answer
faint
is still
metallic
no.
tang
There's
of
nothing
brass
more I can
shaving.
do for you
Dust
here.
motes danced in the soft yellow light filtering through the grime-streaked
been a
windows.
pleasure,
An
but
older man
the
with
day
silver
is
hair and a
getting on.
thick canvas apron
I'll have to
stood
ask
behind a
you to
massive
leave.
scarred wooden workbench. He did not look up when the bell rang. He was carefully adjusting a microscopic hairspring with a pair of finely pointed tweezers. The entire room was filled with a mesmerizing chorus of ticking sounds coming from hundreds of clocks covering every inch of the wall space. "We are closed," the man said, his voice rough and low. "Come back on Monday." Elena stepped further into the warm room, setting her worn leather satchel on a small wooden stool. "I am not here to buy anything," she replied quietly. "I need to rent a workspace. Just a corner bench and a good lamp. I can pay you." The man finally lowered his tweezers. He looked at her over the rim of his heavy glasses. His eyes were sharp, missing absolutely nothing. He took in her expensive but soaked coat, her pale face, and finally, her hands. He noticed the permanent calluses on her
No.
fingertips and the
I said
faint,
stay back.
dark
You
traces
mustn't
of
touch
industrial
this watch.
solvent that soap could never fully wash away. Arthur reached under his counter and pulled out a heavily rusted pocket watch, tossing it carelessly onto the table between them. "The mainspring is intact, but the hands refuse to move," Arthur stated bluntly. "Tell me why." "Do not touch it." Elena stepped
as I
closer
thought.
to the bench.
The
She
balance
leaned
staff
in,
is
her
bent,
eyes
which
scanning the
explains the
corroded metal
erratic timing.
casing and the
simple
exposed,
fix,
intricate
really.
gears. She did not need to pick it up. Her mind immediately traced the flow of kinetic energy through the frozen components. "The third wheel has a bent pivot," Elena said without hesitation. Someone tried to force the winding crown when the lubricant dried out. The pressure skipped the barrel and bent the axis of the
It's all
third
right to
wheel
look
by a
back,
fraction
Elena, but
of a
we
millimeter.
must keep building the
It is
future.
completely jamming the escapement. Arthur stared at her for a long moment. He slowly picked up a rag and wiped the grease from his hands. "There is an empty bench in the back corner," he said, turning back to his own work. "Rent is $200 a week. Bring your own tools." Elena let out a long, trembling breath. She picked up her satchel and walked toward the back of the shop. During her first weeks in the cramped, dusty workspace, Elena's body still held the rigid posture of fear. Every morning when she woke up, her stomach tightened instinctively. Her ears unconsciously waited for Mr. Vance's harsh reprimands or the arrogant clicking of Diana's heels against marble floors. In the old corporate building, her existence had always required swallowing her pride and shrinking into the background, just to keep the peace. But here, no sudden shouting shattered the air. There was only the soft, rhythmic scraping of sandpaper against wood, the low hum of Arthur brewing dark coffee in the back room, the steady, synchronized beating of 100 antique clocks. For the first time in years, Elena realized she did not have to brace her shoulders when someone called her name. Her breathing slowed down, the sharp, gnawing pain in her chest, the anxiety that gripped her every time a design was reviewed, slowly dissolved. Nobody in this cluttered shop treated her like a disposable asset. They looked at her as a person who simply needed a sturdy chair and good lighting. Elena did not know it yet, but this unconditional quiet was slowly dismantling the defensive walls
The
she had
craftsmanship
built,
on this golden prototype
making
is
room
absolutely
for a
exquisite.
fierce,
Thank
unshakable
you.
focus.
We focused on
The deep
blending
betrayal she
radiant luxury
suffered did
with
not break her
unparalleled
into
precision.
tears. The
Diana,
heavy
the
resentment
craftsmanship on
sitting
this
in her
timepiece
chest
is exquisite.
did
What
not
can you tell us
magically
about the
vanish.
movement?
Well, it's a
But
completely
it
bespoke
stopped being
caliber
a crushing
developed
weight.
entirely
It
in-house.
crystallized into a
regarding the recent
piercing,
developments,
absolute
Diana?
determination. Every time she
Oh,
filed
look at the
down a
time.
rusted gear,
I'm
she
afraid
was
we have to
filing
cut
down
this
her own
short.
hesitation. Every time she polished a dull brass dial until it shone, she was rebuilding her own shattered confidence. She did not cry over the stolen blueprints.
Thank you for
She
having
simply
me.
sat under the
The
single
recent
yellow
developments
lamp and began to
require a
draft
strategic
entirely new
response,
ones.
and
Back
we
in
are
the shining
prepared to
heart of
move
the
forward.
financial district, Diana sat under blinding studio lights. A famous lifestyle reporter leaned forward, pointing at the glossy prototype of the watch
Given the recent
Elena had
volatility in
designed.
the market,
The
how
balance
do you
bridge
respond to
design is
critics who say the
revolutionary,
timing
the
here is
reporter
less
said,
than
eagerly
ideal?
holding up a microphone. How exactly did you calculate the precise tension for the micro springs without causing metal fatigue? Diana's bright, camera-ready smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She stared at the complex golden gears visible through the glass casing. Her mind was completely blank. She had no idea what a microspring was. It comes from pure intuition, Diana
Explain
answered
yourself.
smoothly, crossing her legs and forcing a confident laugh. I simply visualized the flow of time and let the raw materials follow my artistic vision. The reporter nodded, rapidly writing down the empty words. Diana took a sip of her sparkling water, her hand gripping the cold glass a little too tightly. The cameras kept flashing, but inside, a freezing wave of panic was beginning to rise. She possessed the crown, but she had absolutely no idea how to govern the kingdom. The engineers at the company were already asking her questions she could not answer. The production line was facing delays because the manufacturing team needed adjustments to the technical drawings. Diana smiled at the photographer, but her eyes were deeply anxious. She had stolen a masterpiece, but a masterpiece requires a master to maintain it. Far away from the flashing cameras, Elena gently placed a freshly oiled gear into the heart of an old mantel clock. The brass teeth caught the light beautifully. Arthur stood a few feet away, leaning against a wooden pillar. He watched her hands move with a fluid, terrifying precision. He had seen many skilled technicians in his lifetime, but the young woman sitting in his dusty corner possessed something entirely different. She did not just repair machines, she commanded them. Arthur took a sip of his black coffee, his expression unreadable. He walked over to a heavy iron safe, hidden behind a stack of broken wooden frames. He spun the combination dial with practiced ease. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a set of watchmaking tools forged from dark, shimmering Damascus steel. These were not tools for repairing cheap toys or simple wall clocks. These were the tools of a grandmaster. Arthur looked at the dark steel, then looked back at Elena's hunched figure, working tirelessly under the dim lamp. He closed the safe quietly. The time was not right just yet, but he knew exactly what was going to happen next. The corporate thieves in the city thought they had buried a naive girl. They had no idea they had
We'll have
just
this fixed
forced a
up in no
prodigy
time.
to sharpen her blade in the dark.
They don't make
The
'em like
afternoon
this
sun
anymore,
cast
kidda.
long, slanted shadows across
a
the uneven
beauty.
wooden floorboards of the
Wow,
shop.
look at the
Elena
wheels
adjusted her
spin.
magnifying loupe, leaning closer to the delicate balance wheel resting on her green rubber mat. She held her breath, carefully applying a microscopic drop of synthetic oil to the tiny ruby bearing. The task required an absolute stillness that she had finally found in this dusty corner. Across the room, Arthur was working quietly, his heavy canvas apron catching the fine brass shavings. He rarely spoke unless it was
Closely
strictly
at the grain
necessary.
there.
The heavy wooden door pushed open, letting
Is
in
that
a
real
sudden gust of
Damascus?
cold
I can't
street
believe
air
it.
and breaking the steady rhythm of the ticking clocks. A young boy from the neighborhood walked in, clutching a brightly painted tin train to his chest. He approached the large front counter and placed the toy carefully on Arthur's massive workbench. "The wheels won't spin anymore," the boy said, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes. Arthur wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and picked up the cheap toy. He did not dismiss the child. He did not tell him to buy a new one. Instead, Arthur reached deep into the pockets of his apron and pulled out a slender, dark metal screwdriver. Elena paused her work. She watched from her corner as Arthur expertly loosened the tiny, rusted screws on the side of the tin train. The light from the front window hit the shaft of his tool, revealing a distinct, rippling water grain embedded directly into the metal. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She recognized that dark, wavy grain immediately. It was genuine, hand-forged Damascus steel, crafted under immense heat, specifically for elite horologists. A single precision tool from that set cost more than most luxury vehicles. Yet, Arthur was using it to fix a $5 tin toy without a second thought. His hands moved with the exact same reverence and care that he would have given to a royal timepiece. People usually measured success by things the eye could instantly calculate. They looked at the height of a corporate tower, the shine of a polished marble floor, or the flash of cameras on a red carpet. Diana had chosen that exact measurement when she stole the blueprints. She craved the loud, visible proof of winning, but there was a far more brutal kind of poverty, one wrapped tightly in silk and expensive champagne. It was the poverty of trust. Up in the Vance executive suites, the crystal chandeliers burned brightly every night. Yet no one ever dared to turn their back on their own colleagues. The smiles were practiced, the conversations were heavily guarded, and words
Don't
were
be afraid
sharpened
of it.
solely to cut
Your
down the
hands know what to
competition.
do.
Diana had eagerly jumped into
You
a
just have to
glittering
listen to
fire,
them.
entirely convinced she had found gold. She was completely unaware that she was only burning herself in a room full of beautiful, empty liars. In contrast, this rundown workshop lacked any chandeliers, but it held the highest luxury a person could possess. It offered absolute, unquestionable safety. Arthur treating a neighborhood child's tin train with the most priceless instruments in the industry
Don't worry about it, they
proved
said.
something
It's
profound.
robust.
He did not need to perform his
Perfectly
worth for an
robust.
audience. He respected the craft of fixing things, regardless of the object's price tag. Here, surrounded by sawdust and old metal, Elena finally felt wealthy. Arthur handed the repaired train back to the boy, giving the wheels a quick spin to show they were working. The child smiled widely, grabbed his
can't just
toy,
force
and
the
ran out the
gears.
door, the brass
break
bell
the whole
ringing
assembly
cheerfully behind
eventually.
him. The old man placed the dark steel screwdriver back into his
This
pocket
chain
and turned
connects the
around.
primary
He
drive
caught
to the
Elena
escapement.
staring from across
If
the
the
room.
tension is
For a
off
long
by even a
moment, neither of
millimeter,
them said
the
a
entire
single
mechanism
word. The
fails.
ticking of the clocks filled the silence between them. Arthur walked over to a heavy iron cabinet hidden behind a stack of broken wooden frames. He pulled out a large, heavy wooden box wrapped in thick velvet and carried it over to Elena's bench. He set it down gently, causing a small cloud of dust to plume into the air. "You have incredibly steady hands," Arthur said, his rough voice low and even. "But fixing a misaligned gear on a standard wall clock is elementary work." He pulled the velvet cloth away. Underneath lay an incredibly complex, deeply tarnished brass carriage clock. The glass dial was shattered, and the internal casing was a chaotic tangle of bent levers and displaced springs. The metal carried the faint, unmistakable smell of sea salt and decades of neglect. "This is a dual escapement maritime chronometer from the late 18th century," Arthur continued, leaning against the edge of her table. 3 master technicians in the financial district have declared it completely dead, he said, tapping the rusted casing. They claim the main barrel is permanently fused to the base plate. Elena pulled her loupe down over her right eye and leaned in. She ignored the ugly, tarnished exterior and looked straight into the dark mechanical heart of the machine. Her eyes traced the flow of the damaged teeth, analyzing the specific points of tension. They declared it dead because they treated it like a modern piece, Elena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. They probably tried to force the winding arbor with brute strength, but this specific escapement relies on a chain and fusee mechanism. The tension needs to be released carefully from the bottom up, not forced from the top down. Arthur's expression did not change, but a faint, unmistakable gleam of respect appeared in his sharp eyes. He reached into his apron pocket and brought out the Damascus steel screwdriver. He did not hand it to her. He simply placed it on the green rubber mat right next to her hand. "Then show me," Arthur said. He did not offer to teach her the steps. He did not stand over her shoulder to supervise the process. He simply pulled up a wooden stool, sitting across from her as an absolute equal. Elena looked at the priceless tool resting on the table, then at the impossible mechanical puzzle in front of her. She reached out and picked up the dark steel screwdriver. The cool metal instantly grounded her. She took a deep breath, lowered her head, and began to dismantle the unfixable. On the 21st day of the restoration process, the glamorous facade surrounding Diana Vance began to crack. She sat behind her massive glass desk, staring blankly at a glowing computer screen filled with angry red text. The lead engineer of the manufacturing division had just sent his 4th urgent email of the week. The production line for the highly anticipated luxury watch was completely halted. The prototype's balance spring was snapping under pressure, exactly as Elena had warned. And nobody in the corporate building knew how to recalibrate the tension. Diana took a sharp breath and slammed her laptop shut, pushing it away. Her phone buzzed continuously on the glass surface, displaying alerts from 3 different credit card companies. She had spent the last 3 weeks hosting lavish celebration dinners, buying imported champagne, and booking private jets for promotional shoots. She had charged everything to her personal accounts, assuming the board would grant her a massive bonus following the launch. But with the launch indefinitely delayed, the board was withholding all executive payouts.
How much longer do you need?
Diana's bank accounts were
We are
entirely
running out of
drained.
time down
The day
here.
she carried those stolen leather-bound folders through the executive doors, she smiled like a victor. In her mind, life was a simple card game,
I know why you came, cousin.
and she had just dealt her cousin
But he isn't here
the
anymore.
worst hand possible. She genuinely believed she was stronger than fate. She had snatched the luxurious future, pushed Elena into the dirt, and rewritten the rules for both of them. Diana kept her chin high, convinced she was a brilliant winner. She did not realize that stealing someone else's ticket never actually takes you to their destination. By using sheer selfishness to rip away Elena's rightful place, Diana was not
Darling,
securing
you
a
must be
golden throne.
mistaken.
She
I
was simply
explicitly
purchasing
followed
a
the instructions you
first-class
left.
ticket
Everything is
straight to her
fine.
own ruin. She
I
hadn't
understand this
stolen
might be
Elena's
complex given your
happiness.
specialized
She had only
environment,
locked
but the
herself in a cage,
restructuring is
completely
essential.
mistaking the
My
iron
plan
bars
is
for the gates of
flawless.
paradise. Diana stood up, pacing
don't
across the
believe
plush
it.
white carpet of her office. She needed a scapegoat,
just
and she
don't
needed
believe
one
it.
immediately. Mr. Yee. Vance was already growing impatient, demanding answers she could not provide. She knew there was only one person capable of fixing the disastrous engineering flaw. She pulled her designer trench coat over her shoulders and grabbed her car keys. She had hired a private investigator a week ago to track down her cousin's location. The address printed on the investigator's report pointed to a rundown industrial district on the far edge of the city limits.
The primary
Diana
servo
drove her
has
sleek
completely
sports
seized,
car
but
through
we
the
tested it
narrow,
yesterday.
rain-slicked
Clearly, the stress
streets.
protocols were insufficient.
Her
The
expression
mission is
twisting in
compromised.
disgust at the sight of the old brick warehouses. She parked illegally near a rusted fire hydrant and stepped out, her stiletto heels splashing directly into a murky puddle. She cursed under her breath, wiping a speck of mud from her expensive leather handbag. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of Arthur's repairs, causing the brass bell above it to ring sharply. The warm, oil-scented air inside the shop hit her face, but she only wrinkled her nose. Arthur was standing near the front counter, quietly organizing a tray of tiny brass
Get out!
screws. He did
I
not
said
greet
get
her.
out of
He
here
simply
right now!
raised his eyes, assessing her frantic, polished appearance with absolute indifference. Diana ignored the old man entirely and let her gaze sweep across the dimly lit, cluttered room. She spotted Elena sitting in the far corner, under a single bright yellow lamp. Elena was leaning over a complex array of tarnished gears, her hand steady as she
Listen
held a
closely.
pair of
This
fine
is your last
tweezers.
chance.
So this is where you
Disappear,
crawled
or I
off
will
to,
personally ensure you
Diana
regret the
said,
day you were born.
her voice cutting through the peaceful ticking of the room. Elena's hand did not shake. She carefully set down a microscopic ruby jewel before turning her head. She looked at Diana,
You seem a
taking in
little
the
on
designer
edge,
coat, the
Diana.
expensive jewelry,
Perhaps you
and the
should wait
desperate, tight
outside.
lines around her cousin's mouth. You are standing in my light, Diana, Elena said evenly. Diana let out a sharp, mocking laugh and walked closer, her heels clicking loudly against the wooden floorboards. You always had a talent for finding the most pathetic places to hide, Diana sneered, looking around the walls covered in old, silent clocks. I expected you to be begging on the street, not playing with garbage in a shed. Elena picked up a soft cloth and gently wiped the tip of her
Get out,
tweezers.
Diana, it's
Why are you
over.
here? Diana crossed her
You'll
arms,
regret
trying to
this.
project an authority she
Just
did not
go.
currently feel. The engineering team is struggling to decipher your messy scribbles, Diana lied smoothly. They want to simplify the balance bridge, but the prototype is acting up. I came to
I
offer you a
told you to finish
temporary
calibrating
consulting
the gauges
contract.
today.
Elena
Instead,
stared
you've
at
made
her,
this
an
disaster.
expression of
Do you
profound
have any
disbelief
idea how
washing over her
important this
features.
is?
A consulting
where
contract,
you
Elena
spend your
repeated
days.
slowly.
Surrounded
Yes,
by
you
grease
will
and
come back to
metal
the corporate
shavings.
office.
It's pathetic, really.
Fix the
Absolutely
prototype
pathetic.
under my direct supervision, and I will make sure you receive a small stipend. Diana pulled a folded piece of paper from her designer bag and tossed it onto Elena's workspace. It is a very generous offer, considering you were fired for insubordination. Elena did not even glance at the paper. The balance spring is shattering because you told them to smooth out the gravity compensation teeth, Elena stated, her voice entirely flat. Diana's eyes widened slightly, her confident posture faltering. You destroyed the precise friction required to hold the kinetic energy,
You thought you had
Elena
won.
continued, turning back to her own work.
You
I
were
told you
wrong.
exactly what would happen. You chose to ignore it. Now you can deal with the consequences. Diana slammed her hand down on the edge of the wooden bench. You work for me, Diana shouted, her voice shrill and echoing off the brick walls. You are nothing but a ghost. You will get in my car right now and fix that design, or I will make sure this pathetic little shop gets shut down by the end of the week. From across the room, Arthur slowly set down his tray of screws. He leaned his hands on the front counter, his expression completely unbothered by the sudden screaming. This property is not for sale, Arthur said quietly. Diana spun around, glaring at the older man as if he were a piece of dirt on her shoe. Everything has a price, old
perimeter has
man,
been breached.
Diana spat viciously.
repeat, the
I have enough
perimeter is
capital backing me to
compromised.
buy this
We need to
entire
leave
block,
immediately.
bulldoze it to the ground, and build a parking lot. Do not test me. Arthur let out a low, dry chuckle. Capital backing you? He reached under his counter, pulled out a thick ledger, and began flipping through the pages. You parked a leased sports car outside. Your coat is from last season's clearance line, and your hands are shaking because you are terrified. Diana's face turned a violent shade of red. How dare you speak to me like that? She hissed, stepping away from the bench. I am the face of Vance Horology. I am the lead designer of a global
Please,
launch.
Elena, you have
You
to
are a
stop
very
this.
loud, very frightened
didn't
child,
mean for
Arthur
any of this
replied
to happen.
calmly,
You must
not looking up
believe
from
me.
his book. Elena stood up from her
Say
wooden
this
stool.
and I swear to-
Take your paper, Diana. Leave the shop. We have actual work to do here. Diana turned back to Elena, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated
Look closely
fury.
at what you
The
signed.
illusion of her success was
There's no
crumbling,
turning back now.
and she desperately needed to drag someone down with her. You think you are better than me? Diana yelled, stepping aggressively into Elena's personal space. You think hiding in this filth makes you a
Look at
real
you.
artist? You
The
are a
perfect
coward.
facade cracking
You always
already.
were. As Diana stepped
I know
forward,
you're the one who
the
sabotaged
sharp
the
point
core.
of her stiletto heel came down directly onto Elena's green rubber mat. There was a sudden sickening crunch. Diana had stepped blindly onto a tiny, highly delicate escape wheel that Elena had just spent 3 hours hand polishing. The fragile brass spokes bent instantly under the heavy pressure, destroying the priceless component beyond any hope of repair. Elena looked down at the crushed piece of metal. The air in the room seemed to freeze completely. For her entire life, Elena had swallowed her anger. She had lowered her head when they stole her credit, stayed silent when they took her inheritance, and walked away when they insulted her talent. She had believed that keeping the peace was more important than defending her own boundaries. But looking at the ruined gear, the symbol of her quiet, honest labor crushed carelessly
Everything we worked
under
for
a designer
rests on
heel,
this.
something
It's
inside
yours
her
now, Elena.
finally
Be
snapped.
careful with it.
Diana lifted her foot and glanced down at the broken brass. She let out a dismissive scoff. Oops, I suppose I can write you a check for $10 to replace your little toy. Before Diana could finish her sentence, Elena raised her hand and slapped her hard across the face. The sharp, explosive sound of the strike echoed violently through the silent workshop. Diana staggered backward, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. Her perfectly styled hair fell across her
It is
wide,
such an
shocked
honor to
eyes.
welcome
She
you
stared
all
at
this
Elena,
evening.
her mouth hanging open in
We have an
absolute disbelief.
incredible night
Elena
planned.
stood perfectly still, her chest heaving.
Ladies and
Her
gentlemen,
eyes
thank you
locked
for
onto her
joining us
cousin
this
with a
evening.
cold,
I
terrifying
just,
intensity.
wanted to
Do not
say
ever
how
disrespect
honored we
my
are.
work again, Elena said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You took my blueprints, you took the corporate title, you took the inheritance. Elena stepped forward, forcing Diana to back away until her shoulders hit a wooden pillar. But you do not own me. You do not own my hands, and you certainly do not own my mind. Diana's breath hitched in her throat. She had never seen this version of Elena. The quiet, submissive girl was completely gone, replaced by a woman who knew her exact worth. You are going to regret this, Diana stammered, her voice shaking violently. I will destroy you. I will make sure no one in this industry ever hires you. Elena did not flinch. She picked up the crumpled consulting contract from the bench and held it out. Take this back to my father. Tell him the prototype is going to fail on the global stage. Diana snatched the paper from Elena's hand, her chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. Tell him that when the balance
Is it
spring
not working?
shatters in front
It's
of the
completely
investors,
stopped.
the two of you will have to explain
Look at his
why the
face. He
brilliant
looks
lead
worried.
designer cannot fix her own creation. Diana swallowed hard. The truth of Elena's words hit her with a crushing weight. She turned around, her heels stumbling slightly over the uneven floorboards, and practically ran toward the front door. She threw the heavy wooden door open and disappeared into the cold rain without looking back. The shop plunged back into a deep, vibrating silence. Elena stood by her bench for a long moment, staring at the empty space where Diana had just stood. Her hand was stinging and her heart was racing against her ribs. She slowly looked down at the crushed escape wheel on her mat. Arthur walked over from the front counter. He looked at the broken piece of brass, then looked at Elena's pale face. He reached into the pocket of his heavy canvas apron. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box and set it gently on her table. That wheel was flawed anyway, Arthur said quietly, his rough voice carrying a strange, profound warmth. Elena opened the small box. Inside lay a flawless, newly forged escape wheel cut from the same dark, shimmering steel as his tools. A master does not cry over broken
Ladies
parts,
and gentlemen,
Arthur continued,
the
turning back to his
mechanism has
counter.
begun
A
its
master
final
simply builds a
count.
stronger one. Sit down, Elena. The real work is just beginning. At exactly 8 o'clock on Friday evening, the grand atrium of the National Museum went completely silent. Thousands of eyes stared intently at the brightly lit center stage. The global broadcast fed the live footage to millions of screens worldwide. Diana stood behind a sleek crystal podium. Her palms were sweating profusely. The heavy studio lights beat down on her perfectly styled hair. A single drop of sweat rolled down her neck. Resting on a velvet cushion in front of her was the highly anticipated prototype. It was dead. The lead investor sitting in the front row leaned forward. His face was entirely unamused. Miss
Ladies and
Vance,
gentlemen,
we have waited 45 minutes. Turn the
please,
crown.
abort
Let us
the
hear the
auction.
movement
We need
run.
everyone to
Diana
move
swallowed
into the exits
hard. Her
immediately.
throat felt like dry sand.
I could please
She
have
reached
your
out with
attention.
trembling hands.
We are
Her
ready
expensive
to
manicured
begin
fingers touched the cold
evening's
gold
program.
casing. She gripped the small
Ladies and
winding
gentlemen,
dial.
it is my
She turned
distinct
it.
honor
Nothing
to
happened.
introduce
No
tonight's
ticking,
Lifetime
no life.
Achievement Award
Just a
recipient.
hollow,
Please
sickening
welcome to the
silence
stage.
radiating from the metal. The crowd began to murmur. The low whispers quickly grew into a sharp, judgmental buzz. Mr. Vance stood hidden in the dark wings of the stage, his face drained of all color. He gripped the heavy curtain, his knuckles turning white. He gestured wildly at Diana to try again. Diana forced a tight, panicked smile for the flashing cameras. It seems we have a slight calibration issue, she lied. Her voice shook through the amplified speakers. The lead investor stood up. A calibration issue? This is the global launch. Make it run or our funding disappears tonight. Diana panicked. She gripped the crown again. She pushed it hard, trying to force the gears to engage. A sharp, horrible snap echoed through the microphone. The sound was unmistakable. The fragile balance
This isn't
spring
just a timepiece,
had completely
it's a
shattered
legacy.
inside the casing.
The craftsmanship
The prototype
here is
was
simply
effectively
unparalleled
destroyed.
in this
Diana
day and
froze.
age.
The crowd gasped. Then, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the massive hall. You cannot force time to move when you have broken its heart. Everyone turned around. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A man walked slowly down the center aisle. He was
If
not wearing
I
a
may
thick
have
canvas
your
apron.
attention,
He was not covered in brass
There are
dust.
matters
He
of
wore a
great
perfectly
importance we
tailored
must
charcoal
address this
suit.
evening.
His silver hair was neatly combed. His posture commanded absolute, undeniable authority. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Mr. Vance let go of the curtain. His jaw dropped open. Diana gripped the edges of the crystal podium, her knees suddenly weak. The event announcer stuttered frantically into his headset. He rushed to the stage microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the primary benefactor of the Heritage Foundation, Mr. Arthur Sterling. Diana felt the floor dissolve beneath her feet. Arthur Sterling, the billionaire titan of the luxury industry, the man who owned half the supply chains in the world, the man who could bankrupt her family with a single phone call. He was the old man from the dusty repair shop. Arthur climbed the carpeted steps to the stage. He did not look at Mr.
I
Vance.
told you not to
he
touch
walked
the mechanism.
straight
Look
toward the
what you've
crystal
done.
podium. Diana backed
This
away
is
instantly, her
unacceptable,
hand
Elena.
shaking uncontrollably. Arthur picked up the ruined
Get your
watch.
hands off
He
me.
held
Do you
it
know
up to
who
the
I
harsh
am?
studio lights.
Sir,
He
you
examined
need
the
to come with
shattered
us now.
gear inside the glass case. A beautiful design, Arthur said into the microphone. His rough voice echoed across the massive hall. Brilliant engineering. Flawless weight distribution. However, the hands holding it are entirely clueless. Diana opened her mouth to defend herself. No words came out. The cameras captured her pale, terrified face. Arthur turned directly to the audience. A true master knows exactly how much pressure a piece of metal can endure. A thief only knows how to break it. Arthur looked toward the back of the hall. The main spotlight instantly shifted. It cut through the darkness and landed on a quiet figure standing near the exit doors. Elena. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. She did not hide her scarred fingertips. She did not shrink under the blinding light. She walked down the center aisle. The massive crowd parted for her in total silence. Mr. Vance stepped forward from the wings, his face red with desperation. He tried to block the stairs. "Security!" he hissed loudly. "Stop her, she does not belong here." Arthur raised one hand. Two massive security guards immediately stepped out of the shadows. They grabbed Mr. Vance by the shoulders and pinned him firmly against the back wall. "Let her pass," Arthur commanded. Elena walked up the stairs. She stepped onto the stage. She did not look at Diana. She did not look at the thousands of faces in the crowd. She walked straight to the podium. Arthur reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a slender, dark metal tool. It was the shimmering Damascus steel screwdriver. He placed it softly on the crystal surface next to the ruined watch. Elena picked it up. The cool metal grounded her instantly. The fear from the corporate office was completely gone. She leaned over the prototype. The entire auditorium held its collective breaths. Millions of people watched her hands on the live broadcast monitors. She moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision. She popped the back casing open with a single fluid motion. She used the tip of the dark steel to extract the shattered spring. She did not hesitate. She reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out a replacement coil. She had forged it herself 3 nights ago under a single yellow lamp. Her calloused fingers danced over the microscopic gears. She adjusted the tension perfectly. She aligned the tiny ruby
Miss
bearings
Vance,
with
did you know about
flawless
this?
accuracy. The crowd watched in
How will this
hypnotic
affect the
awe.
company?
They were witnessing raw, unfiltered
Are the rumors
genius at
true,
work.
Elena?
She sealed the casing shut. She reached out and touched the gold winding crown. She turned it gently. A loud, crisp, rhythmic ticking suddenly filled the room through the microphone. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was powerful. It was steady. It was absolute perfection. The crowd erupted. A deafening roar of applause shook the glass walls of the auditorium. The investors leapt to their feet, cheering wildly. The flashing cameras completely surrounded Elena. Diana covered her face. Tears of absolute humiliation ruined her makeup. The fake empire she had built was entirely exposed. She turned and ran off the stage. stumbling in her high heels, disappearing into the dark wings. Mr. Vance slumped against the wall, watching his legacy crumble into dust. He had chosen image over talent, and it had cost him everything. Elena stepped back from the podium. She looked down at the beautifully ticking watch. She then looked up at Arthur. The old man smiled warmly. He bowed his head slightly, offering her a deep, genuine gesture of absolute respect. Elena had not just fixed a broken gear, she had completely reclaimed her own name. The morning after the global summit, the financial district moved on without Diana Vance. The stock value of Vance Horology plummeted before the trading floors even opened for lunch. Investors pulled their funding with ruthless speed, demanding immediate liquidations to cover the massive debts incurred by the disastrous launch. Diana sat on the cold hardwood floor of her luxury penthouse. A team of stern-faced bank representatives was actively repossessing her designer furniture, carrying out the velvet sofas and the imported crystal vases. She watched numbly as a man in a gray uniform boxed up the expensive jewelry she had bought on credit just 3 weeks prior. The thick stack of unpaid invoices and final notice letters lay scattered across the bare floorboards. The expensive champagne bottles she had celebrated with were now just empty glass, rolling against the baseboards. Her phone, which used to ring constantly with invitations to exclusive galas and fashion shows, remained completely silent. She had desperately chased the glittering spotlight, assuming the flash of cameras would permanently hide her incompetence. Instead, the bright lights had exposed her entirely, leaving her utterly alone in a deeply quiet, empty room. She possessed absolutely nothing of real value. When the first heavy snow of the season began to stick to the cobblestone streets, Mr. Vance arrived at the newly established Sterling Heritage Institute. It was a massive, beautifully restored brick building located on the quiet edge of the historical district. The facility was funded entirely by Arthur's private capital, but it operated completely under Elena's technical command. Mr. Vance stood in the grand reception hall, shivering slightly in his thin wool coat. He looked drastically older than he had just a month ago. The sharp, arrogant posture of the powerful executive had completely dissolved into the slumped, defeated shoulders of a desperate man facing the total
Elena,
erasure of his
please.
name. He approached the heavy
know this
oak
is
doors of
difficult,
the
but
main
we have to
restoration
discuss
lab
the
and
future
pushed
of
them
this
open.
company.
The air inside smelled of warm cedar, sweet synthetic oil, and melting soldering wire. Elena was standing at a large drafting table, inspecting a set of original 18th century blueprints under a bright halogen lamp. Arthur was across the room, carefully cleaning a heavy brass pendulum. Elena, Mr. Vance said softly, stepping into the warm room. Elena did not flinch. She set down her magnifying loupe and turned to face him. She wore a simple canvas apron over a thick gray sweater. Her hands still carried the faint, dark marks of machine oil. She did not look like a corporate executive. She looked like a true artisan. The board is voting to liquidate the company tomorrow morning, Mr. Vance continued, his voice trembling in the quiet space. Diana has filed for personal bankruptcy. The creditors are taking the main house. We have absolutely nothing left. Elena looked at him with absolute calm. She did not feel the sudden rush of vindication she had once imagined during her darkest days in the basement. She only felt a profound, vast distance between herself and the man standing by the door. I need you to issue a public statement, Mr. Vance pleaded, taking a hesitant step closer to the drafting table. If you endorse our remaining inventory, or if Arthur offers a minor financial buyout, the banks might give us a 6-month extension. You are family, Elena. You cannot just
Elena,
stand by and
please,
watch
you
us
have to
lose
listen to me.
everything.
I
Arthur
have
stopped
heard enough,
wiping the
Mr.
heavy
Vance.
brass pendulum. He set his
give me
cloth
5
down
minutes to
but did not
explain.
intervene. He watched Elena,
These tools are
trusting her
evidence,
judgment
Elena.
completely. I am watching
Where
the
were you
exact
when they were
outcome you
used?
engineered, Elena replied evenly. You deliberately chose a glamorous face over a working engine. Now the gears have permanently stopped. We made a terrible business error, Mr. Vance said, his face flushing with desperation and shame. I admit that, but I gave you your start. I put those first tools in your hands when you were a child. You owe me this much. Elena picked up a small, polished brass gear from the table and held it up to the light. You genuinely believe you controlled my life, she said quietly. You and Diana thought you held all the power. You thought by taking my blueprints and firing me, you were writing my tragedy Mr. Vance swallowed hard, unable to meet her steady, unwavering gaze. But looking back, your greed did not destroy my future, Elena continued, placing the gear back onto the green velvet cloth. Your cruelty possessed no real creative power. It only served one singular purpose. It transported me out of a toxic room where my talent was being suffocated. You were just the harsh vehicle that pushed me toward the exact place I always needed to be. You did not rewrite my destiny. You simply drove the car. Mr. Vance stared at her, the last shred of his arrogant illusion shattering completely upon the wooden floorboards. He realized she was not angry anymore. She was entirely indifferent to his existence. The fear of his authority held absolutely zero weight in this building. "The door is behind you," Elena said, turning her attention back to her vintage blueprints. "Do not come back." Mr. Vance stood frozen for a few agonizing seconds. The silence in the massive room was absolute. No one offered him a sympathetic smile. No one offered him a financial lifeline. He turned around and walked out into the freezing snow, carrying the full, crushing weight of his own ruin. The Sterling Heritage Institute quickly became the absolute pinnacle of global horology. It was not just a commercial workshop, it was a sanctuary for preservation. Elena and Arthur brought in passionate apprentices from all over the world, teaching them the lost art of extreme patience and microscopic precision. They did not care about media appearances, glossy magazine covers, or flashy launch parties. They cared deeply about the integrity of the metal, the exact tension of the coiled springs, and the preservation of human history. Arthur provided the immense global resources, securing rare antique pieces from private auctions across Europe. Elena provided the unmatched technical genius, bringing dead, rusted machines back to vibrant life. They worked side by side every single day, not as a wealthy benefactor and a rescued employee, but as two brilliant minds, sharing a singular, quiet passion for the craft. The massive iron safe in the back room remained permanently unlocked. The priceless tools forged from dark Damascus steel were utilized and respected by everyone in the lab. Late one Tuesday evening, long after the apprentices had swept the floors and gone home, Elena sat alone at her corner wooden bench. A single yellow lamp illuminated the dark, scarred wood of her workspace. She carefully slotted the final microscopic ruby bearing into the heart of a highly complex marine chronometer. She reached out and tightened the smallest gold screw with her customized brass tweezers. She set her tools down on the rubber mat and leaned back in her heavy wooden chair. She closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath of the warm, oil-scented air. She listened intently as the heavy brass balance wheel engaged with the restored teeth of the escapement. The crisp, powerful, rhythmic ticking instantly filled the empty room, cutting through the silence of the winter night. It was not just the sound of a perfectly repaired machine. It was the sound of a life entirely under her own control.